Hello and good evening. Welcome back. I hope everyone's doing well. Tonight's conversation. I'm going to be transparent with you and say that I have to redo this recording. I've just tried 3 times and I failed every single time. So I'm a little less patient than I would like to be. But you've seen the title, you know what I'm going to talk about. So let's dive into things. I'm going to discuss the 3 most important books of my life, the 3 books that have shaped and changed my life in the most fundamental way. And I'm going to share with you towards the end a list of recommendations that I think you'd be good to read. The 3 books are going to be Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. All 3 books are very different by nature. All 3 books are very different stories, very different writing qualities, but they share, all of them in their own way, a very intimate, deep, emotional, and empowering message. So, let's go over the 3 books. I'm going to begin with Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. I have a short list of notes here. I don't usually work with notes, but today I feel does grant me that opportunity. So, Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. Where to begin? I bought the book in October of 2020, right after it was released, because I'd listened to Matthew on the Armchair Expert podcast with Dax Shepard, a podcast I would also recommend. A good conversation they had. Anyway, Matthew, as most of us know, is extremely charming. He's charismatic, he's conversational, he has a very specific quality of voice, and he's very attractive. But as the book revealed to me, he's also incredibly profound, sensitive, and insightful. I read the book and learned that for the rest of my life, up until now, it would contribute the most out of anything I'd ever read. Because that book, to some degree, was responsible for me embarking on my 419-day solo hike across Europe. One day in class, at the time I was studying physical therapy, I was reading a story where Matthew, after having just finished filming Reign of Fire, a movie where he played a dragon hunter, he had a bald head and he was very, very strong. He was of heavy build, and because he was traveling, he went under a different name. He went under David, journalist and boxer. And he ends up eventually in rural Africa, chasing a wet dream he has now had for the second time in his life. In this village, he is eventually challenged to a wrestling match by the champion wrestler of that specific region, and before he knows it, he finds himself in a dirt pit next to a humongous athletic black man wearing pretty much nothing but a fucking Tarzan cloth, surrounded by 100 African people screaming and shouting and chanting. I will spare you the details of the book. I think it's a book, if you haven't read it thus far, I would highly recommend you read it immediately. But what I will share with you is that the result of me reading that story was anger and not resentment, but dissatisfaction with myself. I realized in reading that story that the manner in which I'm living my life will never result in such stories, never result in such memories, never result in such passion, never result in any of that. And after class, I go to my friends and I tell them in this very passionate way that I want to change my life. I want to change something. What I'm doing is wrong. The path I'm following now, the path I'm walking down will never satisfy me. I have to change something. And bless them, they were very encouraging and very supportive. And that night, upon going to sleep, mind you, this is October of 2020. That night, upon falling asleep, I had a dream. I had a dream, and I remember as clear as day. The dream was of me hiking across the Austrian Alps with a big black backpack, black boots, and a beard. And I wake up, and I remember being, I remember being just as invigorized and as passionate, upon waking up as I was earlier that day in class. And I get out of bed and I run across to my desk butt naked, and I'm in standing. I kind of hunch over, I open up my journal, which I'd just begun writing in, and I write down in my journal something along the lines of big black backpack, Alps, mad dog, punctuation mark, done. Like, it was a super short entry. But in a way, I was, though I didn't know it then, signing a contract with myself and the universe. Because in May of 2022, I did in fact cross the Alps with a big black backpack and black greyish boots. I didn't have a beard yet, but the beard came. But suffice to say, I had the dream, the premonition, in October of 2020, and I executed on that dream in May of 2022. So I'm confident in saying that the book has been of utmost contribution to my life, because those 14 months I would go on to have on that adventure have changed everything in my life. The things I'm pursuing now, they are all, in a way, a direct result of me reading that book. And though surely the book will not have the same effect on everyone, the book is, in its nature, in its essence, it's folklore, it's a blend of academic and philosophic and deeply intimate thought, and a collection of extremely, extremely funny, amusing, and insightful life stories. So if you haven't read the book yet, I recommend you do. I'm going to go over now a few quotes and insights from the book that I found most valuable to me. Just to give you an idea of the book. First one is less impressed, more involved. Matthew lost his father when he was rather young, in his early 20s. And up until then, for Matthew, his father was a figure that stood above the law. He was a big chunk of a man, blue-collar, hardworking, charismatic, extremely strong, and yet super gentle. And to spare you the details of the manner in which Matthew was raised, the manner in which Matthew's parents raised him and his brothers, I am going to say that when his father died, it was the first time, according to Matthew, that he felt as though he had stepped into manhood, because no longer did he have anyone to fall back on when he needed a safe net. It was gone. His father was dead. The consequences of his actions were now, all of a sudden, all the more real. And so he felt as though now it's important for him in his life to be less impressed and more involved. I'm not going to go into the details of my relationship to my father, but I will say that it spoke to me immensely. Secondly, I have here a quote that I wrote down in my journal, not a direct quote from the book, but it was a quote that resulted as a thought I had read in the book. The quote is, "The harder I push my limits, the kinder the world around me becomes." How to elaborate on this? I'm going to share with you a short story on this quote, and I hope in the end it makes sense. On the walkabout, my solo hike across Europe, I made myself inaccessible to almost the entire world. I deleted my social media and I changed my phone number. My phone number was accessible, I believe, at that point only to my brother and my parents and a very small handful of people. And I had just finished working in Mykonos for 2 months. But upon finishing my contract in Mykonos, our employer told me and a few other people I'd worked with that we will not be paid when the paid should have come in. In fact, he told us he doesn't even exactly know when we can expect our payment. I was faced with a decision. I can either stay in Mykonos, find another job, and continue with my travels then, or I can, as I'd promised to myself, continue with my travels and not let the external world stop me and just figure things out as I go. So I did the latter. I left Mykonos with the little cash I had left, and then I made my way to Athens, and from Athens I made my way all the way to Bari, Rome, by boat. Upon arriving in Bari, I was left with approximately, I think, €6 to my name. That's it. That was all. I had no connections, no contacts, no people to help me, and I didn't have the option of calling anyone to send me money or help me because that was not part of the deal. That was not part of the essence of the walkabout. So there I was in Bari. That evening I paid €4 for a pizza margherita at this little restaurant by the beach. I ate the pizza, I called my younger brother, and we spoke over the phone. I told him nothing of my money worries, I just wanted to hear him, speak to him. And so I did, and it was great. And I went to sleep. I took my backpack and my sleeping bag, and I slept on the beach. It was a very windy day, and I learned that evening how important it is to know where the wind is coming from, especially if you sleep on the sand, because otherwise the sand will inevitably keep slapping you in the face while you sleep, or it will, and eventually be all up in your backpack. Valuable lessons to learn. And the next morning, I buy myself somewhere into the day a small bag of grapes, and that was all that I'd eaten that day. And I hiked for 35 kilometers from Bari into the country towards Rome to a small town called Druvo di Puglia that I had found on the map. I end up in Druvo sometime around 6:30 p.m. maybe, and although it was very hot throughout the day, it was getting cold. The wind was getting cold, and I had been sweating all day. I didn't have clothes to feel very warm in the evening, and as the what would you say? As the usual excitement of traveling and adventure settles in, and in the evening you're left with nothing but a lack of food, extremely painful and aching hips, and no place to sleep, a very negative quality of thought can very easily sip into your fountain of knowledge of you. There we go. So anyway, I arrive in Ruvo, and I realize that I can't just stay here and sit on the side of the road because I'll inevitably become sick. So I decide to stand up and make my way into town. As I'm walking, my hips are in such pain that I'm basically certain that I've got arthritis in both joints, and I'm slowly turtling my way into the city center and end up in a church. I walk into the church, but I'm also carrying a huge backpack, so upon entry, I realize there's a huge mass going on, and if I walk in, it's just going to cause commotion, and I'm going to be stared at. So I decide, not for me, unfortunately. I leave the church and make my way across the sidewalks and streets, basically off of celestial suggestions. So if a particular light caught my eye, if a particular little animal running around caught my eye, I just followed whatever felt like I needed to follow, which sounds cheesy, but believe me, is most certainly true. And I end up at this restaurant. I knock on their door, Bledi's Pizzeria, because I'm cold and I want to warm myself up. And so I knock on the door, and the lady opens the door. I don't speak any Italian. She speaks no English, but she lets me in. I show her as a gesture that I'm cold and I wanna warm myself up, and she lets me in, and I sit down, and I start journaling. This was the 4th of October 2022. I know exactly because it was my niece's birthday, and I, into the evening, had called my father and had spoken to him over the phone. Anyhow, as mentioned, I have no money. I have no connections, no contacts, no people I know. I have nothing. The lady keeps asking me what I want to eat. I tell her I can't order anything because I have no money, that I'm really sorry, and if she wants me to, I will leave in 5 minutes. I just want to warm up. Because we can't communicate, I pull out my phone and I type it into Google and I translate, and I show her the message. Upon reading the message, she looks at me, she gives me my phone back, and without saying anything, she runs across the room this way to the gentleman who's behind the bar making the pizzas. They speak briefly, they have a short conversation, and she comes back and tells me, give me your phone. I give her the phone with Google Translate ready, and she types into the phone, I'm going to bring you food. And as I'm saying, no, thank you, I can't pay, that's so kind, thank you, she gives me the phone back and just leaves. And before I know it, I had received a 2-course meal, followed with a dessert and a glass of Coke and, cola, the drink, not the, just one. And I ate everything. I drank what I was given. And in speaking with this lady, she kept asking me what I was doing, why I'm traveling like this. And so through Google Translate, I tell her the story very briefly as I can. And she's completely fascinated. Now, by now, because I was eating for a while, people had entered the restaurant, and next to me was a young couple. A young gentleman and a young lady. Beautiful young people. Soon to be friends, I learned. The young gentleman, Michele, could speak a little bit of English, so he functioned as a translator for us. And upon entering the restaurant with nothing, virtually nothing, but my possessions, I have now received a 2-course meal, and thanks to Michele and his lady, I was offered a place to sleep for the night in an apartment that he's currently working on. He's an electrician. I received a couch, food, friendship, and attention. The fourth particularly being of vital essence when you travel alone the way I did, sometimes. And because I had told Michele eventually about my situation with the employer I had in Mykonos and that I'm still waiting to receive some money, Michele spoke to friends of his and got me a job at this local farm. He said that in exchange for my work, they will offer me a place to sleep and they will offer me food. But I tell this story in relation to the quote I said in the beginning, the harder I push myself, the harder I push my limits, the kinder the world around me becomes. I share this quote because when I was leaving the restaurant with Michele and his girlfriend, I asked via Google Translate the owner of the restaurant why they showed me such kindness. Excuse me. The gentleman, Bledi, answered, and I will share with you now the exact text he left on my phone just before I left the restaurant. Here we are. I asked him, thank you for your kindness, but what have I done to deserve this? I can't pay you back. Though if you wish, I promise I will come back and pay once I can. You are very generous. Thank you. Bledy took the phone and he leaves me with this message. I wish you the best, and may God watch over you. I hope you'll make your way and career. You asked why we offered you what we did. Why is simple. In a world of appearances and fictions, you appeared sincere and honest, and this, for us, is enough. You see, the lesson I learned that evening was that this beauty, this kindness, this generosity, I was only given because I was prepared to put myself in a situation where I could receive it. Despite all the red lights and warnings the world was giving me, the delayed payment, the lack of my own money, hunger, pain, aggressive solitude, confusion, fear, in spite of moving through all those emotions and feelings and realities and sticking true to what I wanted to do, the world delivered me kindness. But the prerequisite for that kindness, that extreme kindness that I received, the prerequisite was pushing myself as far as I could. Because in relation to that, the kindness I received had something to be weighed against. So, yes. I think this to be a very universal truth. The manner in which you can experience life deeply depends on the manner in which you are ready to partake in life deeply. You want to feel love? You're going to have to risk heartbreak. You want to feel victory? You're going to have to risk failure. Risk, I think, here is at the heart of it all. And I'm happy I took that risk that day. I'm going to go back to Ruva one day with my brother. He doesn't even know this, but I will. I promise them I will. I'll have a huge meal. Johan and I are two men who can eat to quite some extent. And by the time I go back, I'm going to speak a little bit of Italian at least. And I'm going to thank them. One day. And there was a third insight of the book. Let me continue. A third insight of the book that I want to share with you is the process of elimination. According to Matthew, the best manner in which you can figure out who you are is by figuring out exactly who you are not. I think the question of our identity, what it is we are, who it is we want to be, is extremely common nowadays. Especially because a lot of people make their living off of being them, open for our consumption. And us, through consuming these people on Instagram and TikTok, are constantly nudged to question, well, why the hell am I not enjoying my life to the degree that it seems this individual is? Now, the implications of social media and as to how much of that all is true and fake, it's a different conversation. I think what Matthew says here is definitely true. At least it's valuable. Through figuring out who you are not, inevitably so, all you are left with is exactly who you are. Now, with that realization comes a reality that can be often very harsh. You might realize you are not as intelligent, as diligent, as industrious, as hardworking as you believe yourself to be. But that's fine. Because in truly realizing what it is you are now finding the position to work on who it is you want to be. Those were the three most insightful takeaways from me from the book. Although there is a plethora of many more insights I could have gone through. But that, I think, the most valuable for me. So, Greenlights, I highly recommend. It's a memoir. If you haven't read it yet, do it now. Buy the book. I don't think you could possibly regret it. Let's move on. The second book, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. There's a lot to say about this book. Let me begin like this. When I discovered this book, I should say, upon reading this book, when I began reading this book, I was in Mykonos, working as a restaurant host. My function at the time at the restaurant was to stand in front of the restaurant at the receptionist area and greet guests who walk into the restaurant, accompany them to their table, and hand them over to their head waiter or head waitress for that evening. I was also responsible for reservations and seating prioritizations and seating lists for events, and ensuring that our restaurant to some degree is always full. I would spend my evenings mostly sitting outside in a beautiful blue, dark blue, navy blue linen shirt and linen pants. My skin was tan, I had a blonde beard and long blonde hair, and I had this little beautiful chain on me as well. It's still in the bathroom. And because very often, particularly Monday to Thursday, the evenings were slow, I spent most of my evenings completely uninterrupted. I had time to myself. So, in the evenings, sat outside there, I would write in my journal or read. I had a Kindle, and I decided one evening I'm going to read Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. The book is the telling of a story of a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps. It's a book I cried to twice. It's brutal, it's beautifully disgusting, it's honest, and extremely intriguing. I learned recently, for example, that the manner in which a book changes you depends on the time at which the book meets you in your life. So, if you were to read, for example, a Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, that's a book I tried to read multiple times in my life. When I first tried, I was 19, and I was too young and too inexperienced and too stupid to make anything of it, really. I tried a few times later on in life. Each individual time I learned different things. Each individual time the book was a different book. And I'm happy that A Man's Search for Meaning found me when it did, or I found it when it did. An argument can be made for both. Because it shifted my perspectives on life in many, many critical ways. I also have to add that at the time when I was in Mykonos, I was extremely serious by nature. The walkabout for me was always a very introspective and spiritual adventure, but Mykonos itself is an extremely unhealthy place. It's ridden with people who are corrupt, lie, are there for the wrong reasons, drugs, sex, violence, corruption. The place itself is hideous. Hideous, I mean, not superficially, hideous in its core. I know this because I worked there. I know how the island is run. And so, as a form of protest, I spoke as little as I could. I took my work seriously. And I resented the place. I really did. And with that, a lot of people that I worked with. I passionately disliked almost everyone I worked with. They were lazy, they were despicable, they were violent, they were immoral. I will go into this at length in the book, but while I was there, I wasn't having a great time. Looking back, it was an amazing adventure, and I look back at it fondly. But while I was there, it was a shithole, one big shithole. Mykonos, I think in general, I referenced in one letter. I said uh, this island to which we wrongfully refer to, this big pile of shit that we wrongfully refer to as an island. Um, my thoughts on Mykonos. Anyhow, there was in that book many things I could reference that made me want to never open it again. Stories of how people held on to their humanity when treated as simple cattle. But I want to share with you two things, two biggest takeaways from the book. One of which is a quote from the foreword of the book, the entry to the book, by Viktor Frankl himself, which is, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. It's controversial a little bit, at least by nature, because we live in a day and age where, at least my algorithms constantly tell me that to move forward, you have to pursue a specific aim. And to be successful, you have to be consistent and persistent and dedicated. And to make life happen the way you want it to, essentially you have to work very hard. That is a gross simplification of the human condition. It's not how things work. A routine will not always save you. Sticking to a schedule will not always save you. And persisting at something will often not result in what you think it will. With P61, I learned, for example, that I had spent so much time fixating on the finish line, on getting it done, on becoming the man who ran 61 marathons in 61 days, that I learned I took all of the magic and beauty and essence of the finish line, of the end, because I had already lived it in my mind so often. The finish line was still beautiful, and the success was still there. But the success of P61 happened not because I constantly aimed at the finish line. It happened because on days where I really had to, I shut the fuck up, I put my head down, and I got the run done. Now, there's more ways, more deeper ways to get into this sentence, but I'll leave it at that. I also want to mention a second thing that I learned from the book, which is the value of humor and the value of hope. Viktor Frankl points out that amongst those who survived the concentration camps, many of them had learned in some way to hang on to their humor. It was his stance that humor was to a large degree responsible for them not dying. He also noted that the best of them, the people in the camps, never made it out. I'm not going to expand on as to why, but I'll leave that for you to discover. I recommend reading the book. But it was hope that really, really struck me. He told a story of how many of the inmates, if we can call them that, whenever Christmas would come around, for some strange reason, for whatever reason, with a complete lack of proof, had hoped that by the time Christmas had come around, they would be set free. Again, they weren't told this. They had no reason to hope this, but they hoped nevertheless. They hoped that by the time Christmas came around, or by the time New Year came around, they would be in the embrace of their wives and children, and life would be normal again. And this hope, it was his observation, helped them to withstand and endure illness, sickness, because we're talking about the wintertime especially, illness, sickness, the extreme violence they faced, the demoralizing and inhumane way they were being treated. That hope was responsible for their survival. And by the time Christmas came around, all of a sudden, people would start dying. And those who held on to hope that things would end briefly, that things would end soon, just projected that hope onto the new year, hoping that, well, when the new year comes around, then we'll be free. And unsurprisingly, the new year came around, and another whole bunch of people just suddenly died. Quickly, of illness, of long sustained injury, of something. There was a third story I wanted to share with the book, but it would be spoiling too much for those who hadn't read it. For those who have, I'm going to mention the violin. I think that's enough to know what I want to mention, what I want to speak about. But yes, that book's a deadly book. It's a deadly and powerful book, not to be read lightly. I highly recommend. Let's move on. The third book is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, a novel. A Wizard of Earthsea is the telling of a story of a wizard, of the becoming of the greatest wizard to ever live. Sparrowhawk, he was called. The book, in a very excellent way, discusses the importance of speech and the power of words, the necessity of story, and the importance of friendship. The story itself is a becoming of age tale of a young man who was ambitious and driven and hungry for power. And there's one particular sentence I want to share with you from this book. You have great power inborn in you, and you use that power wrongly, to work a spell over which you had no control, not knowing how that spell affects the balance of light and dark, life and death, good and evil. And you were moved to this by pride and hate. Is it any wonder the result was ruin? I read this book when I was preparing for P61, when I was in Switzerland. It was one of those books that I just couldn't put down. I would read the book in the gondola on my way to work. I would read the book in buses. I would read the book in my bedroom. I would read the book in lunchtime, in breaks from work. I think to a large degree because I saw myself in Sparrowhawk. I saw myself in that tale of a young man who really, really, really wants to become something. A tale, I think, that is true to the male condition. But that sentence stuck with me. And it stuck with me because the whole book is told through such a mythical lens. But it's so applicable to everyday life. The world of fantasy it inhabits is all that is. It's a world of fantasy. But the telling of dragons and spells, good and evil, light and dark, all that is drawn from real life conclusions, real life situations, real life reality. That is what a good story does. A lot of fantasy stories fail to do that. They fail miserably. Very, very miserably. And though this book is, I think, aimed at a younger audience, a teenage audience, it would be stupid to assume that just because of that, it's not of value to people further along in life. Not at all. It's a fascinating book, and it's an exceptionally well thought through book. That is what I think is the most impressive part about it. Not the writing itself, but the architecture of that book. Completely fascinating. There's not much more I can say because, well, I've been going on for long enough, and also I think these books are for you to experience. But I would urge you to remember that story is vital. Story is not only a medium to consume or entertainment to enjoy. Story is the truth of human experience. It is within story that we find meaning, pleasure, love, morality. Your life is nothing but a story. Now, some people live their life through the lens of experiencing a story more than others, certainly. But reading a book can be a life-changing experience. And I would urge you not to focus on reading many books in your life, but instead rereading the really good ones, the ones that really speak to you. Because that's by nature going to be a different thing for every individual. Different books for every individual. For me, those three are the Champions League. The books I derive most quality from. So read them. Read them. Get back to me what you think. Feel free to leave some thoughts in the comments if you've read these books before. And otherwise, yeah. Don't forget, after putting down a good book, that your life story is what matters. The time you have is limited. Treat it as such. Think of your life as a story, a movie unfolding, a book in the writing. In writing. Anyway. I'm going to cut it off here. It's been going on long enough, and I gotta eat dinner. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope any of this was of some value to you. Have a good evening. As always, much love.